Karoline Leavitt slammed the office door behind her, eyes darting to the phone ringing on her desk. She grabbed it, her fingers trembling with a mix of frustration and urgency. "Yeah?" she snapped. "Karoline, have you seen it?" The voice on the other end of the line was her colleague, Alex, sounding unusually tense. "I've seen it," Karoline muttered. "I can't believe it. They're calling him a hero." There was a pause. Alex knew what she was talking about, but they both needed to say it aloud. "Garcia," Alex finally said. "The article. The Atlantic's cover story." "Yeah," Karoline hissed. "It paints him like some innocent father. It's a lie, a damn lie. Why isn't anyone talking about the truth? About his ties to MS-13? The human trafficking he's been involved in? How are they letting him off so easy?" "You're making a mistake, Karoline," Alex warned. But Karoline's jaw clenched. "No, I'm not," she shot back, her voice sharp. "This is bigger than some article. This is about protecting innocent people, about stopping someone like Garcia from getting away with it because he's got connections. I'm going public." Alex hesitated before replying. "You sure about this?" Her fingers gripped the phone harder. "Yeah, I'm sure." She hung up, the weight of her decision settling over her like a heavy cloak. Her eyes flicked to the stack of files on her desk. Every page, every document was evidence. Evidence she had no choice but to share with the world. She couldn't stay silent, not after everything she knew. A sudden knock at the door snapped her back to the present. Without waiting for permission, her assistant Mia stepped inside. "Karoline, the press is waiting. Are you ready?" Karoline stood, her heart pounding in her chest. "I have to be," she said, forcing her feet to move. She walked out of her office with determination in her stride, ignoring the rising flutter of nerves deep in her stomach. The press conference was already underway when Karoline arrived, cameras flashing and reporters murmuring in hushed tones. She stepped up to the podium, the eyes of the room fixed on her. Her pulse quickened, but she steadied herself. "I'm here today to talk about a matter that's been overlooked," she began, her voice cutting through the murmur in the room. "The article from The Atlantic on Mr. Garcia is not only misleading, but it is dangerous." The reporters leaned forward, their pens poised. "Mr. Garcia is being painted as an innocent father, but this is a man with deep connections to MS-13, a criminal who has trafficked human beings across borders. You are not being told the full truth." The room went silent. Karoline could feel the skepticism, the tension hanging in the air like a storm cloud. She could hear a reporter's voice from the back. "But Ms. Leavitt, you don't have proof of these claims. Aren't you risking your own credibility?" Karoline's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp as she responded. "I have more proof than you can handle. I've seen the files, I've spoken to the investigators. Garcia is no hero, he's a criminal, and I'll make sure the truth is known." Before she could continue, another reporter raised their hand, cutting her off. "But how do you explain the fact that Garcia is a father? A man who's been described as a victim of circumstances?" Karoline's eyes burned. "His children? They're victims too, but they are not the reason he's been allowed to operate with impunity for years. And that's why I'm here, to make sure that stops." The room erupted in a flurry of questions, and Karoline couldn't focus on any of them. Instead, her mind kept replaying the moment she first read the article. Her blood had boiled. Every word from The Atlantic felt like a slap in the face. How could they let a man like Garcia escape the truth so easily? How could they ignore the horrors he'd caused? She wasn't going to let them get away with it. She couldn't. The night after the press conference, Karoline sat alone in her office, staring at the glowing screen of her laptop. It was late. Too late. But she couldn't stop. She scrolled through the endless barrage of messages and comments on her social media, each one more hostile than the last. Some accused her of lying, others of trying to ruin an innocent man's life. But there were also a small handful of messages that supported her. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of the endless scroll. It was a message from Alex. "You're stirring the pot now. Expect backlash. Get ready." She stared at the message for a long time before replying. "I've been ready for this for years." But even as she typed the words, she wasn't sure. The uncertainty gnawed at her. What had she gotten herself into? How deep did this rabbit hole go? The phone buzzed again. "You sure about this? Garcia's got connections. He's not just any criminal, he's dangerous." Karoline's fingers hovered over the keys. She thought about what she knew. The evidence, the interviews, the connections. She could see Garcia's face in her mind, that smug look of a man who knew he was untouchable. A man who had never had to face the consequences of his actions. She tapped out a quick reply. "I'm sure." Karoline sat back in her chair, the weight of her decision crashing down on her. The tension in her shoulders made her want to collapse, but she refused to let herself. She wasn't backing down. Not now. The battle had just begun, and she was going to fight it with everything she had. The next few days were a blur of media interviews, phone calls, and mounting pressure. Karoline's every word was dissected, every statement twisted and turned against her. The media storm was unrelenting, but the worst part? The threats. She'd expected them, of course. It was part of the game when you took a stand like this. But they weren't just vague warnings. These were specific, chilling messages. Stop or you'll regret it. We know where you live. Her hands shook as she read the latest message, the words like ice water in her veins. She threw the phone down onto her desk, her mind racing. This wasn't just about exposing Garcia anymore. This was about survival. But Karoline couldn't back down. Not now. Days turned into weeks. Karoline was now a marked woman. The press was relentless. The government was quiet. And Garcia, he was more dangerous than ever. Her calls were becoming more desperate. The sources she had leaned on for support were now afraid to speak out. Every door she tried to open seemed to close in her face. But then, one night, she got a tip. A former investigator who had worked on Garcia's case reached out. Karoline wasted no time. She met him at a small diner in the middle of nowhere. The rain fell in sheets as she sat across from him, the shadows of the booth swallowing them whole. "You're playing with fire," the investigator said quietly, his voice strained. "You don't understand how deep this goes." "I understand enough," Karoline shot back, her voice cold. "I've seen enough." The investigator leaned in, his face pale. "It's not just Garcia. It's bigger. He's a pawn in something much more dangerous. There are people who won't let this go." Karoline's stomach dropped. Who? People who control everything. Politics, business, everything. The investigator's eyes flickered nervously around the room. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Karoline felt a chill run down her spine. But she wasn't backing out now. She couldn't. "Tell me what I need to know," she demanded. And he did. The names, the connections. The deeper the investigation went, the darker the truth became. Now, Karoline had no choice but to keep going. The pieces were falling into place, and she couldn't turn back. But with every new revelation, the stakes got higher. And the danger? It was only just beginning. The press conference was set for the following day, but Karoline couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just another event. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her blazer. Her reflection stared back at her, face hard with determination, but her mind raced with questions. "Am I ready for this?" She took a deep breath, as if trying to steady the storm inside her. She had spent hours preparing, but the real test was about to begin. At the press room, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Karoline could feel the weight of the room's gaze. She walked up to the podium, each step measured, her heartbeat pulsing in her ears. She stood tall, cleared her throat, and began. "I'm here today to address the distortion of truth in the Atlantic's recent coverage of Mr. Garcia." The words felt like ice, sharp and final. She barely noticed the flash of cameras, the scribbling of pens. "I'm not here to attack anyone, but I will not stand by while a man like Garcia is allowed to skate free with his crimes, while a narrative is spun that turns him into some innocent father. He is far from that." The room went silent. A reporter stood up from the back, voice booming. "But Karoline, you're implying that the Atlantic is part of a larger conspiracy to cover up Garcia's criminal ties. Do you have evidence for such an accusation?" Her eyes locked onto the reporters. "I don't need a conspiracy to prove a criminal's past. The evidence is right in front of us, and it's being buried. Garcia isn't just another victim. He's a man with blood on his hands, with a network of people protecting him. People who want you to believe that the good man you read about in that article is the truth." Another reporter cut in. "But the man has a family, children, a home. His life, from all appearances, is normal." Could he really be the villain you're describing? Karoline leaned into the microphone, her voice dropping low. "Normal? Mr. Garcia's life is a facade. His children may be innocent, but their father is no hero. There are hundreds of victims out there. Victims he's left behind. You want proof? I've seen the files. I've heard the testimonies from those he hurt." The air in the room was charged, a mix of disbelief, doubt, and growing tension. Karoline's breath came faster, the pressure rising with every second. The accusations she was throwing around were heavy. Could she back them up? Could she stand firm under this kind of scrutiny? A reporter interrupted, eyes gleaming with suspicion. "So, you have documents? Evidence of his criminal network, his connection to MS-13? You expect us to just take your word for it?" Karoline felt the walls closing in. "If I had my way, I'd show you every document. But the people protecting him? They'll destroy it before anyone ever sees it. Just like they've done with the evidence of his trafficking operations. Just like they're doing now to shut me up. The room went quiet again, the reporters exchanging glances. There were whispers now, doubts among them. But Karoline wasn't done yet. "You don't need to believe me, you don't even need to trust me," she continued, her voice stronger. "But I'm telling you this, the truth is out there, and I'm not going to stop until the world knows who Garcia really is." The press conference had barely ended when Karoline was bombarded with phone calls, emails, and messages. The backlash was immediate, and it was fierce. The media attacked her credibility, painting her as reckless, a woman with an agenda rather than a commitment to truth. By the time she got back to her office, her phone was flooded with notifications. It buzzed nonstop, flashing headlines like, "Leavitt accused of spreading false accusations," and "Unsubstantiated claims ruin reputation." Karoline sat down at her desk, staring at the screen. She knew this was coming, but it didn't make it easier to bear. The weight of the public opinion was suffocating. Mia, her assistant, knocked and entered the room. "Karoline, the calls from the press are already flooding in. They want interviews, more statements. They want you to backtrack. I'm telling you, this thing is getting bigger." Karoline didn't look up. She was too focused on the pile of messages and articles calling her a liar. "They'll call me whatever they want," she muttered. "They don't have the facts. They just have an agenda." "Do you?" Mia asked, her voice unsure but her eyes searching. Karoline paused, finally looking up at her assistant. "I have the truth, Mia. That's all I need." Just then, her phone rang. It was Alex. "Karoline, this is serious. You've seen the backlash, right?" "Yeah, and I'm not backing down," she replied, her voice cold and resolute. "What's the next step? We need more than just words. The media's tearing you apart. You need something big." Karoline's mind raced. "We have to get Garcia's past on the record. Expose the connections. No more subtlety, no more waiting. I'm done being patient. We go after him directly." "I agree," Alex said. "But we're treading on dangerous ground. You're not just fighting Garcia anymore. You're going up against the very people who want this to stay hidden." Karoline slammed her hand down on the desk. "I know that, but I'm not backing off. If they want to bury the truth, fine, but they're not going to do it while I'm still breathing." Alex's voice lowered. "All right, but be careful, Karoline. I'm warning you. They'll come after you with everything they've got." "I'm not scared of them. I'm scared of what happens if I don't do anything." With that, Karoline ended the call. She turned her attention back to the flood of messages coming in. Some were supportive, but the majority were condemning her. There was a part of her that wanted to break down, to hide away. But she didn't have that luxury. The truth was too important. Karoline knew what she had to do next. She had to dig deeper. She had to expose Garcia no matter the cost. But every step she took felt like she was digging herself into a hole, one that might swallow her whole. Still, she couldn't stop, not now. Her phone buzzed again, a message from an unknown number. "If you don't stop, you'll regret it." Karoline's heart skipped a beat. She stared at the message, the words burning in her chest. They were already watching her. But that only made her resolve harder. They couldn't stop her. They wouldn't. She was just getting started. Karoline's life had shifted into a high-speed chase, one she hadn't expected when she first took this case. Every day brought new threats, new people turning against her, and new allies she never thought she'd have to trust. But this night was different. She sat alone in a small diner, the rain outside tapping against the windows like a steady drumbeat. She had arranged this meeting on a hunch, a gut feeling that there was more to Garcia's connections than anyone was willing to admit. Her phone vibrated. A text from Alex. "Be careful. The investigator you're meeting is a wild card. Don't trust anyone right now." Karoline stared at the words for a moment, ignoring the chill that crept up her spine. She'd already come this far, and she wasn't turning back now. She put the phone face down and scanned the diner. It was nearly empty, save for an older man hunched over a cup of coffee in the corner. He looked like the kind of person you could forget in a second, someone who would blend into the shadows and never be noticed. But Karoline knew better. She'd been told this was the man who could offer the missing pieces to the puzzle. A low voice interrupted her thoughts. "Ms. Leavitt?" She turned to find him standing beside the booth, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. He slid into the seat across from her without waiting for permission. Karoline didn't flinch. She'd learned a long time ago to expect the unexpected. "You're the one who's been digging into Garcia, right?" His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it much. "That's right," Karoline answered, trying to keep her tone steady. "And I need answers. You were an investigator on his case. You know the details no one else does. The man gave her a wary look, eyes scanning the room before he leaned in closer. You're not gonna like this, but Garcia's nothing more than a pawn in a much bigger game. Karoline felt a twinge of disbelief. What do you mean? He lowered his voice even more. He's connected to more than just MS-13. He's a link in a chain. There are people, powerful people, who don't want any of this to come out. Karoline's heart raced. So it wasn't just Garcia? You're telling me it's bigger than just his crimes? She asked, leaning in, barely able to keep her voice steady. Much bigger, the man confirmed. You don't know who you're dealing with, Leavitt. These people control everything. Politics, media, business. Garcia, he's just a front. He's a small player in the bigger scheme. Karoline couldn't stop the surge of anger that rushed through her. She had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed was like a punch to the gut. You need to get me more, she demanded, her tone steely. Names, proof, anything. The man hesitated, glancing around nervously before pulling a small, crumpled envelope from his jacket. He slid it across the table, his eyes never leaving the door. This is the evidence you need, but I'm telling you, Karoline, the deeper you dig, the more dangerous it gets. Her fingers shook as she grabbed the envelope, her mind already racing through the possibilities. You've given me the information I need to take them down, he sighed, a long, drawn-out sound of regret. Maybe. But just remember, you're not fighting just Garcia. You're fighting the people who control him, and they won't go down without a fight. You're in over your head, Leavitt. Karoline stood up, the envelope clutched in her hand. I've been in over my head since I first went after Garcia. I'm not stopping now. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the diner, the night air cold against her skin. As she got into her car, she looked down at the envelope. The battle was getting darker, but Karoline wasn't backing down. Karoline sat in her office, the silence around her as heavy as the pressure mounting inside her chest. The documents she'd gotten from the investigator had confirmed everything she'd feared. Garcia wasn't the mastermind. He was just a cog in the machine. The people behind him were untouchable, powerful. If Karoline wanted to bring Garcia down, she'd have to take down a whole system. Her phone buzzed, and she snapped it up. It was Alex again. You've seen the info, right? She texted back quickly. I have, and it's worse than I thought. I'm going after them, Alex. Garcia is only the beginning. Her heart pounded as she thought about the next steps. How much deeper could this go? She needed a plan, and she needed it fast. But every move she made seemed to be leading her into darker waters. The door to her office opened, and Mia stepped inside. Karoline barely acknowledged her presence as she continued to stare at the documents scattered across her desk. Karoline, Mia began, her voice hesitant. The calls. They're getting more aggressive. They're threatening you. Karoline glanced up briefly. She had expected this. I know, but I won't stop. Not until Garcia's whole network is exposed. Mia's face softened with concern. But you're putting yourself in danger. You're putting everyone around you in danger. This is bigger than you realize. Karoline sighed, rubbing her temples. She wasn't going to back down. She couldn't. The truth had to come out, and if she had to walk through fire to expose it, then so be it. I don't care about the danger, Mia, Karoline said, her voice low but fierce. What I care about is making sure Garcia doesn't get away with what he's done, what they have all done. Mia stared at her, her eyes wide. And what if it's too much? What if you can't expose it all? Karoline's lips pressed into a hard line. She was tired, but she had no intention of stopping now. I've come too far to turn back. I won't be the one who lets them get away with this. The tension in the room seemed to swell, thick and suffocating. Karoline felt it, felt the weight of everything that was on her shoulders. The path she was walking was dangerous, and the deeper she went, the more it felt like the ground was crumbling beneath her. But she couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. I need to make some calls, Karoline said, standing up abruptly. We're going to take the fight to them. Mia opened her mouth to say something, but Karoline had already turned her attention back to the phone. The silence between them grew, and Karoline knew it would never be the same, not after this. As she dialed the number of a journalist who had helped her in the past, Karoline's mind raced with a single thought. It's time to expose the truth. But she wasn't prepared for what was coming next. The game was changing. And so was she. Karoline's phone buzzed incessantly, an endless stream of notifications, and yet she couldn't tear her eyes away from the small stack of documents on her desk. The more she read, the deeper the conspiracy seemed to go, the deeper the danger grew. She ran her hand through her hair in frustration. She had expected resistance, of course, but this was something else. She was no longer just uncovering the criminal activities of a single man. She was about to pull the curtain back on a vast network of corruption, one that had its fingers in everything: business, politics, law enforcement, and media. Caroline's mind raced as she paced the room, feeling like she was one step away from a revelation that could unravel everything. She needed a breakthrough, and she needed it fast. The phone buzzed again. It was a message from Alex. "I've been digging, and you were right. There's something off about Garcia's defense. Someone's pulling strings behind the scenes. They've got major political backing, and it goes deeper than we thought." Her pulse quickened. Political backing? She muttered to herself, her thoughts clouding with possibilities. Who the hell is protecting him? The message continued. "I've traced some donations, tied to a few powerful donors with a stake in a few international policies. This isn't just about Garcia. It's about pushing a bigger agenda. You need to be careful. This isn't just criminal. It's political." Her breath caught in her throat. "Political," she whispered again, the weight of the word sinking in. She was no longer dealing with a criminal conspiracy. This was about power. Real power. Caroline's hands shook as she grabbed her phone and dialed Alex. "Alex, you need to tell me everything. I want names, connections, everything." There was a brief silence on the other end before Alex spoke, the seriousness in his voice unmistakable. "It's bigger than we thought, Caroline. These people? They're not just a group of powerful individuals. They've been pulling the strings for years, shaping policy, shifting the narrative. Garcia is just a pawn in their game." Caroline's grip tightened on the phone. "I can't believe it. Who are they?" "You're not going to like it, but it's political insiders, donors, lobbyists. They've been keeping Garcia protected, controlling the narrative. And they've got more dirt on him than you can imagine." Caroline's heart pounded. She had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed was a bitter pill to swallow. She wasn't just fighting a criminal. She was fighting a network of power players who had been controlling the system for years. And now, they were going to stop at nothing to keep their secrets hidden. "I need you to keep digging," Caroline said, her voice low but filled with determination. "I need everything. Names, dates, connections. This goes beyond Garcia now. I'm going after all of them." Alex hesitated and then whispered, "Be careful, Caroline. This is a game you don't want to play." She hung up the phone without replying. She didn't have time for warnings. She wasn't afraid, not anymore. Caroline turned toward her desk, her mind already working through the next steps. She had to move fast. She had to expose these people before they buried her, and the truth, under their pile of lies. But she was beginning to understand something more disturbing with every passing minute. The more she uncovered, the more dangerous this fight was becoming. The tension in Caroline's office was palpable. She sat alone, the weight of everything she had learned pressing down on her chest like a boulder. She stared at the documents spread out in front of her, names, dates, financial records, but nothing compared to the chilling realization that this wasn't just about exposing Garcia. This was about bringing down an entire network that had been pulling the strings for far too long. It had started with a simple story, but now, Caroline knew she was fighting a battle much bigger than she had anticipated. The deeper she dug, the more she realized how many people were involved. Powerful people, dangerous people. And now they were on her radar, circling, waiting for her to slip up. Her phone rang and Caroline snatched it up without hesitation. "Caroline, I've got something for you." Alex's voice crackled on the line. She leaned forward. "What is it?" "I found the connection you were looking for," Alex said, the urgency in his voice clear. "I followed the money, and it leads right to a major political donor, one who's been a key player in pushing Garcia's narrative. His name is Richard Owens, a billionaire with a seat at the table of several international policy boards. He's got ties to everyone from senators to multinational corporations. He's been funding this push to clear Garcia's name, and it's not just about saving him, it's about controlling the narrative." Caroline's mind spun. "Owens?" she repeated, tasting the name in her mouth. She had heard whispers of him before. He was the kind of person whose influence could shape countries, whose wealth could change the course of history. And now, it seemed he was the one holding the strings of Garcia's defense. "Exactly. And there's more," Alex continued. "Owens isn't working alone. He's got a network of people backing him. Donors, lobbyists, even law enforcement officials who are helping to cover up Garcia's past. The ties go deep, Caroline. Really deep." Caroline clenched her fists, her knuckles white. "How deep?" Alex hesitated. "The kind of deep where exposing them could ruin everything, not just Garcia, but the whole system they've built. If you go after Owens, you're not just fighting Garcia anymore. You're going after a whole power structure. A surge of adrenaline shot through Karoline's veins. This was it. This was the breakthrough she had been waiting for. "I'm not afraid of Owens," Karoline said, her voice steely. "If they want to fight, I'll give them one. I'm going after the whole damn system. Garcia is just the start." Alex didn't respond right away, and Karoline could feel the weight of his silence. But she didn't need his approval. She had already made her decision. "I need everything you've got on Owens. I want to know who he's connected to, where he's pulling the strings, and what he's hiding. The world needs to know what's really going on." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then Alex finally spoke. "Be careful, Karoline. You're playing with fire now. You're going up against the most dangerous people in the world." "I've been playing with fire since day one," Karoline said, her voice steady, unwavering. "And now it's time to burn it all down." She hung up the phone, the adrenaline still coursing through her. There was no going back. She was in this fight now, whether she liked it or not. But she wasn't afraid, because the truth was on her side. Karoline's mind spun as she stared at the evidence in front of her. She had all the pieces now, and it was time to put them together. Owens was the key. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that exposing him wasn't just about Garcia. It was about revealing the web of corruption that had been controlling the narrative for far too long. The fight had just escalated to a new level. Karoline didn't know how she was going to take down someone like Owens. But she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about one man's criminal activity anymore. This was about everything that had been hidden in the shadows for far too long. And now, it was time to bring it all into the light. Karoline woke up to the blaring sound of her phone ringing, a momentary blip of relief before reality hit her all over again. She was no longer just fighting one man's secret. She was up against a corrupt system. As the sun rose over the city, her inbox was already flooded with new threats, accusations, and media frenzy. But there was something different about this morning. Her phone buzzed again, and she grabbed it, expecting another round of angry messages. Instead, a single text from Alex sent a chill down her spine. "It's out, the leak has hit." Karoline didn't waste a second. She opened the link he'd sent, and her heart stopped. There it was, a massive document dump, complete with pictures, bank records, and damning evidence implicating not just Garcia, but the entire network of people Karoline had been tracking. Political donors, law enforcement officials, corporate leaders. The names she'd only whispered to Alex were now publicly available for the world to see. But it wasn't just the sheer amount of data that took her breath away. It was the timing. The leak was too perfect. The file had been released at exactly the right moment to cause maximum chaos. Someone had tipped off the press, and now the world knew everything. Or so it seemed. Karoline clicked through the documents quickly, skimming the names, the dates. It was all there. Garcia's ties to Owens, evidence of political donations that had shifted entire policy agendas, payments that had been funneled through offshore accounts to shield Garcia's criminal activity. But there was something else, something that didn't add up. The leak wasn't just one-sided. Garcia's supporters had already launched a counterattack, framing the whole leak as a smear campaign orchestrated by Karoline herself. The press, hungry for a scandal, latched onto the theory that this was a politically motivated attack, not a genuine exposure of corruption. Karoline knew this was no coincidence. The powers behind Owens weren't going to let this go down without a fight. The phone rang again, snapping her back to reality. "It's Alex," she muttered under her breath as she answered. "Karoline, this is bad. They're going to spin this leak to their advantage. They're already calling you a criminal. You need to act fast." "I know," she replied through gritted teeth. "But it's too late to stop this. They've already played their hand. We've got to make sure the real story gets out. Not this distraction. We need to find out who did this and why. Someone with access to these files is trying to bury you, Karoline." Karoline felt a rush of urgency hit her, like she was about to be swallowed whole. The leak could destroy everything she'd worked for. If the narrative got twisted, it could bury Garcia's true crimes, and her own credibility along with it. She needed to control the story, but the question was, how? Before she could respond, the phone went silent. Someone had hung up. The day ahead would be a storm she wasn't ready for. Karoline was barely holding it together. With each passing hour, the media frenzy grew, and the backlash against her increased exponentially. News outlets had already shifted their focus from Garcia's crimes to Karoline's alleged role in the leak. branding her as a reckless activist who was willing to tear down anyone who stood in her way. Even her supporters started wavering. The questions weren't just about Garcia anymore. They were about her methods, her motivations, and her connections. Some even wondered if Karoline had crossed a line she couldn't return from. That night, Karoline sat alone in her office, her face illuminated by the cold light of her computer screen. The documents she had so carefully assembled were scattered in front of her, but the answers didn't seem as clear anymore. The leak was spiraling beyond her control, and now there were whispers of criminal investigations being opened into her actions. A knock at the door broke her concentration. Mia entered cautiously, her face pale. "Karoline, there's something you need to see." She held up her phone, and Karoline's stomach dropped when she saw what was on the screen. A picture of her in public, leaving a meeting with Alex. The caption underneath it read, "Leavitt seen with known criminal allies. Questions about her involvement in the Garcia scandal arise." Karoline stared at it, her heart racing. The media wasn't just attacking her credibility. They were trying to destroy her, piece by piece. Her every move was being scrutinized. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about protecting everyone she had worked with, the truth she was so desperately trying to expose. She stood up abruptly. "This isn't going to stop until I'm silenced, Mia. I've put myself in the crosshairs of some of the most dangerous people in the country, but I'm not going down." Mia's voice wavered with worry. "You're in way too deep, Karoline. They're closing in. It's not just about the article anymore. They're threatening your life." Karoline clenched her jaw. She could feel the weight of everything. The threats, the pressure, the looming uncertainty. And yet, she had never been more determined. The truth had to come out. And if she had to burn everything down to do it, so be it. "I'm going to find out who leaked those files," Karoline said through gritted teeth, her voice steady. "And when I do, they're going to wish they never crossed me." Mia hesitated. "Be careful, Karoline. There's no going back now." Karoline walked past her assistant, already thinking about the next step. She had no choice but to go further down this dark path, even if it meant losing everything she had fought for. The night was dark and cold when Karoline finally made her way to the meeting point. She wasn't sure who had leaked the documents, but she had a hunch it was someone who wanted to protect the powerful network that had been operating in the shadows for so long. The truth was there, waiting to be uncovered, but someone had made sure it would be buried before it ever saw the light of day. The alley where she was meeting the whistleblower was quiet. Too quiet. Karoline's senses were heightened as she glanced over her shoulder, her mind racing. Who could she trust now? How many of the people she thought were allies were actually working against her? A figure stepped out from the shadows. It was the whistleblower she had been waiting for, a government official with vital information about the people pulling the strings behind Garcia's protection. "You're sure about this?" Karoline asked, her voice low and filled with caution. The whistleblower nodded grimly. "I have the documents, but once you know what's in them, there's no going back." Karoline took the folder, her hands steady despite the rising anxiety in her chest. As she opened it, she felt her pulse quicken. The documents were even more damning than she could have imagined. Names of officials, evidence of covert meetings, proof of payoffs that spanned years. It was all here. Everything she needed to expose the full extent of the conspiracy. But as she scanned the pages, she realized something chilling. The whistleblower's involvement was more direct than she'd known. They had been feeding information to Owens and his network all along. Before Karoline could react, the sound of approaching footsteps made her freeze. She turned to find a group of men, cloaked in darkness, closing in on her. She recognized their faces from the files, people connected to Owens. "This ends tonight, Karoline," one of them said, his voice cold and menacing. Karoline's heart pounded as she backed away, her mind racing. There was no escape this time. The truth had been exposed, and now it was time for the final battle. With no more options left, Karoline's thoughts flashed back to everything she had fought for. The truth, the victims, the fight for justice. She was about to risk everything she had, but it didn't matter. She had come too far to back down. She gritted her teeth and stood tall. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice unwavering. "The truth is coming out, and no one, not even you, can stop it now." As the men advanced, Karoline didn't flinch. She had given everything to this fight, and she would go down swinging if she had to. This was her final stand, and she would make sure that no matter what happened, the world would finally know the truth.